Hello, everybody. My name is Wes Simpson. I am the founder of LearnIPVideo.com and also the curator for our sessions this week. What I wanted to do is give everybody an update on the new things that are happening in ST2110. The standard was originally published in 2017, and since then we've been busy discussing and contemplating and pushing forward with some of the new requirements that we've encountered out in the field and published a bunch of updates in the past couple of years. So this chart basically shows you the different standard numbers in numerical order, and it shows you their revision history. So you can see the first four that came out in 2017, kind of the core one. 2110-10, which is the system timing spec. 2110-20, which is the video encapsulation specification for uncompressed video. 2110-21, which is the packet pacing scheme for the video delivery system. And then 2110-30, which is the audio, uncompressed digital audio, PCM audio. All of those basically form the core of 2110, and they were all in the process of being updated or have been updated in 2022. You'll also see some that were introduced a little bit later. You'll see that we had 2110-31, which was first introduced in 2018. That was a spec to move AES audio, AES3 audio, completely intact across an IP network. We have 2110-40, which is the all-important ancillary data. And again, those have both been updated in the last 2 years. Down at the very bottom, you see a new spec, 2110-43. We won't talk about that too much, but that is time text markup language. And then we have in the middle, we have a couple of things that are new additions to the video spec. We have 2110-22, which is the support for constant bitrate compressed video. We have 2110-23, which, as you can see there, is listed as an RP. So rather than being a standard, this is a recommended practice. What that means is that you don't have to follow this, but this is the way that we recommend that you handle two different things. Dash 23 talks about how you put one video essence over multiple different packet streams. And then you have 2110-24, which talks about how to do standard definition video. So all of these things have been created, updated, things like that, and you can see from the chart here the ones that have been newly issued. So these are all available from SMPTE. So let's dive into what these different standards are going to be working with. So 2110-10, system definition changes. So the first thing that we did, and we actually spent a fair amount of time on this, is we did a lot of work to streamline and make more accurate the definitions of some of the clocks that are used within the standard today. So we have the media clock, which is inherent to the media, whether it's audio or video. Whatever clock was used to create that is considered to be the media clock. The RTP clock is a way that we put timestamps on packets. So that's how the network knows and the receiving device knows how those packet times work together and how they relate to the actual media. We have the timestamp reference clock, which is basically a new term, and that is where we actually go into the session description protocol file, the TSRef clock, and is it crucial to the operation of a 2110 system? Not necessarily, but it is definitely important to have this as part of your session description protocol, and it's important that you know where your reference clock is coming from. Is it coming from a PTP Grandmaster? Is it coming from a internal reference clock? So that allows you to trace back where your time base is coming from. We have the fact that all packet streams can use header extensions. to be compliant with the RFC. We mandate that you must not send out any fragmented IP packets. So if your maximum transmission unit is 1,500 bytes on your network, you are not allowed to send out any packets longer than 1,500 bytes. That's very important. It really has an impact on system operation, system behavior, things like that. We had some folks trying to send jumbo packets over a 1,500 byte network, and it just causes way more work for the receiver, lots and lots of problems throughout the system. So clarified that. And then the last thing that we did that's really kind of in the housekeeping area is that we clarified that you're not allowed to use certain multicast address. That's just good behavior, but it's now in the standard. So some of the new stuff that's in 2110, and this is the most significant change, I would say, out of all the updates that we have out here, is that the definition of something called TSDELAY. And the idea behind TSDELAY is that we want to have every sender specify how far from their timestamp reference point to when the first packet gets emitted for that flow, okay? Now, if you're familiar with 2110-21, we know that there's a deliberate standoff from the time that we use as the capture time, which is shown on this picture as N times T frame. There's a deliberate requirement in -21 that you wait a certain amount of time before you start sending packets, okay? What this TSDELAY parameter allows you to do is specify exactly when that first packet is going to be emitted, okay? And there's actually, believe it or not, there's actually an upper and lower bound when you go through -21. So what that allows a receiver to do is to know when packets are going to arrive and do things like make alignment happen, manage their buffers better, and things like that. One of the other things that TSDELAY allows us to do is get away from having to think about the operation of a 2110 system as having all time measured in units of a frame time, okay? So originally there was a spec that said you must or you shall emit your video from your output in alignment with that N times T frame that we had before, and you must have a very tight parameter on that. Well, without TSDELAY, this is what happens in your network. So I've got a video source here. I've actually got two video sources. Video source A is feeding into a processing device that, let's say, is going to take 3 milliseconds to do its job, okay? So video A will have will be on frame 0, if you will. There will be no built-in frame delay. But when that first processing block is getting ready to emit that packet, it has to realign its output, even though it only incurred 3 milliseconds of delay on a frame of video that might be 16 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds, or something even longer. It has to realign that back to N times T frame. So now we've got one full frame of delay in the output of that device, okay? Then at the input to the second device, we have that second video coming in. That, of course, is going to be related to the N times T frame. It's going to be one frame later than one frame earlier than the one that was coming out of our first processing step, our first workflow step. But they're going to go into that new device aligned. That one's going to, let's say, take 5 milliseconds. And again, at the output, we have to realign that output back to N times T frame and incur another full frame of delay, even though we've only got a small amount of actual delay in the system. So with TSDELAY, what it allows us to do is use session description protocol to say, okay, the delay coming out of processing step 1 is 3 milliseconds, and the delay coming out of processing step 2 is going to be the sum of the ones before it, so 8 milliseconds. And what that gives us is the ability to have the devices know, okay, I've got this signal coming, let's say video B coming in here. That's going to be synced to N times T frame. But the signal coming out from my workflow step 1, I'm going to read the SDP. I'm going to see that TSDELAY is 3 milliseconds. And it says, oh, I know how to align those because I know that there's a 3 millisecond difference between them. So now instead of burning a whole frame worth of delay, we can now have the workflow step 2 start immediately upon receiving the input from workflow step 1. So what that allows us to do is pipeline the system, get rid of this integer number of frame times delay. And if you think about it, really what we're doing is we're getting away from using a reclocking DA at the input of every one of our devices, like you would in standard video. That's conceptually what we're eliminating the need to do. So just to give you a quick example of how TSDELAY is calculated, there's an upper bound and a lower bound to when packets have to leave a sender to comply with 2110-21, okay? And so the upper limit, the latest that you can start sending packets is is equivalent to a time of 28 lines of video. The lower bound is the earliest that you could possibly have enough pixels to send a packet. If I don't have any pixels, I can't send a packet, so I have 25 lines of blanking. And this, again, this example is for a 720p, 5994, 422, 10-bit video. Each type of video is going to have its own calculation. So the lower bound, and then for sample SDP that we put into the standard, we used a TSDELAY value of 570. I think that was the final decision. And to show what this looks like graphically, if we come in, let's say if you have an SDI signal coming in that's aligned with your system clock reference, you have 25 lines of blanking before any video appears. Then of course we have our delay for the start of active video. There's a horizontal blanking interval there. And then in order to accumulate enough data for a full packet of 2110 data, 422 10-bit, we need 572 pixels. So that's going to give us a time of about 567 microseconds is the quickest time that we can have a perfectly synchronized sender that's complying to 2110-21 actually be able to start emitting packets, okay? 2110-21 also specifies a worst case, which would be 28 lines of delay, and that is 623 microseconds. So if you don't have any processing delay, that would be your TSDELAY. If you had that 3 millisecond processing delay that we showed before, then your TSDELAY in these cases would be 3,567 microseconds or 3,623. So that information allows you to say, this is offset from my main source and gives you a very accurate way of representing that. So the next thing I want to talk about is a TSMODE parameter. This again was an addition to 2110-10, and it allows us to say, where did the timestamps come from that you're using for these packets? Sample mode means that they're coming from a source, like a camera or a microphone or whatever. So when TSMODE equals SAMP, that means that the timestamps are coming from the origin source of a particular media flow. TSMODE equals new means that we're restamping the RTP timestamps in our packets, so that you can't reference the RTP timestamp field in that packet to say, when was this actually created? Was it, was the camera shutter open at this time, or was a microphone sampling those audio samples at this time? When it's new, it means, hey, we went through a mixer, we messed around with it, we're creating a whole new stream. So you can't count on that as to where the audio was actually sampled. Then we have TSMODE equals preserved. That is a device that said, well, we kept the RTP timestamps on the way into our device. We kept those intact on the way out, but we don't know what's upstream of us. We don't know if it's a SAMP, we don't know if it's a new, whatever, but we did our job and we kept it as preserved. So those are the 3 different allowed values for the TSMODE parameter. So the next standard, 2110, and that new version of 2110-10 was released in late 2022, And that will, going forward, we'd like as many people to adopt that. 2110-20 video was also updated at the end of 2022. And basically, this was some housekeeping. We created a new transfer characteristic to support the camera log S3 format. There's a very big manufacturer that happens to like that video format. And it's a SMPTE standard. You can see there, ST2115. There's a new colorimetry spec in there called Alpha, which means that it's a brightness only. It's a single channel used for masking. So that was also defined in 2110-20, the 2022 version. And otherwise, if you're not using either one of those, you can use the old version of 2110-20, the 2017 version. And the key thing about that alpha, and sorry, that was not a deliberate pun, but anytime you're using a key signal, we clarified that you have to use alpha colorimetry. You can't use a full color colorimetry for a keying type signal. And then we've also said that you can support RTP header extensions. All 2110-20 senders should support RTP header extensions. And again, couple little clarifications. We have to use immediate transport parameters when necessary, and that we got rid of a semicolon that really messed up SDP for a lot of people for quite a while. 2110-21 traffic shaping. One of the things that we did there is that we said that you can have constant bitrate compressed video, either gapped or linear mode. In the original version of the spec, it was only linear mode. That's very useful for the ultra low delay compression codecs that we have nowadays that maybe only are delaying 2 or 3 lines of video. So you can, if you want to do that, you can send out your packets in a gapped mode. You don't have to linearize them. That actually saves, again, real time in an end-to-end system. We clarified that the way the spec for how you calculate interlaced video timing, because the old one was kind of hard-coded around standard def, and this is much clearer. And that we also clarified that the narrow and wide receivers that are spec'd in 2110-21 must have a TS reference clock direct. You can't use a local MAC or something like that. Constant bitrate compressed video. Here we explicitly stated that the virtual receiver buffer models in 2110-21 no longer apply. Again, when you're thinking about compressed video, the buffer management stuff that we had in there before doesn't really make sense. But we can have the narrow or the narrow linear, the gapped or the ungapped, and we can, basically use very, very simple buffer management for the compressed stream. We also clarified that the bitrate parameter for the constant bitrate video is the basically the number of bits in a frame time divided by the duration of that frame. Fairly simple stuff. Okay, standard definition. You'd think we'd be beyond that by now, but we're really not. We're still playing around with it all these days later. So we do recommend that if you're going to do standard definition, that we're going to define all standard definition video signals as having sample rows that are 720 pixels wide, and that we support both 525 and 625. Standard mode is required for all devices. A 525 line system is defined, as you can see, with between 480 and 486 sample rows, and the 625 line system is defined as having 576. So these are your active sample rows, okay? That is what we would call a normal video image. We also offered an extended window because there are a lot of things from legacy standard def video, including the way that captions are done in the US and things like that, that required some additional vertical and some additional lines of video to be included, so you can actually go to an extended window mode, which is shown here on the diagram, and you can see how many lines you can provide. One of the really fun things about standard definition video is that the pixels are not square. Okay? If you draw a rectangle or an object that's 20 pixels wide and 20 pixels high, it won't be a square on your display. It'll come out as a rectangle. So the pixel aspect ratio tells you how to do that correctly and to meet the originator's intent. So just a real simple numerical example here. An NTSC video signal is made to be 704 by 480. If you display that as 4 by 3, what you end up with is the actual image is slightly narrower than if you had square pixels. So by about 10%. So you end up with a pixel aspect ratio of 10 to 11. Interestingly, of course, in European countries, when you're using PAL signals instead of NTSC, the pixel aspect ratio actually goes the other way. The pixels are fatter than they are high. Just, you know, they didn't like each other. They weren't as transatlantic back then as we are today. So here are the recommended pixel aspect ratios that we say that you should use in your session description protocol, and then a little excerpt of the session description protocol that should apply to that. 2110-31, if you remember, is the spec that defines how to take an AES-3 signal intact through the IP 2110 based system. We relax the constraints on block start and frame start bits because, as it turns out, they have two different meanings and two different specs within the audio world. Okay, so I said, okay, fine, we'll live with some, you know, we'll live with whatever you're doing. And then we clarified that the media clock and the RTP clock have to be the same as the sampling frequency for audio. And we also did an IANA registration of the AMS24 MIME subtype within the audio MIME type, so that now you're officially, you know, using that. Again, lots of cleanup, you know, lots of housekeeping here. 2110-40. The enhancement here was to define two different transmission models for ancillary data. The original spec, which is tied to RFC, I want to say 8331, it'll show up in a minute, gave you a 1 millisecond window for your ancillary data timing. When you're dealing with these low delay networks, you want your ancillary data to be really close to where it was in your original signal, so that's when we came up with low latency transmit mode. So we updated that. So that's now a parameter you can use in your SDP, and we also specified that audio packets should not be transported using 2110-40. That senders that include SDI location info must tell you what that the packets have to be in increasing order, and then here's the SDP considerations that came along with that. So I got a couple minutes left. I just want to go over some of the current activities within the 32NF group that's drafting the next additions to the 2110 suite. So we're talking about high bandwidth signal pass, something that's that needs metadata but is not tied to a specific video frame. So we need a way to, for example, carry, if you will, Dolby audio that has a lot of metadata that goes with it. We want that as a separate path if you want. So we have the fast metadata framework, which is in process. We also have 2110-42, which is a conceptual way to deliver SDP over fast metadata. So we're still debating about that. RP 2110-25 is very soon to be released. It's talking about a lot of measurement practices, and one of my colleagues gave a talk about this yesterday, I believe, so feel free to look that up when I get that posted. As you can see, though, we've standardized a lot of ways that all the test equipment can make measurements with 2110. 2110-30 audio, we noticed that we only specify receivers. We don't talk about transmitters at all. So we're looking at doing that, adding some parameters for transmitters, the different levels. Then the last thing, one that I've been sort of loosely associated with, is the PICS Project, which is Protocol Implementation Conformance Statement. Now, you might say, oh my God, why do we got to do this? But the idea is that we're going to provide a standardized checklist for people to evaluate systems and to report on the specific capabilities of their devices. So we're going to make a PICS statement for each one of the key 2110 standards. So, and we're going to put a 1 in front of the number of it. So the recommended practice 2110-120 is the PICS document for ST 2110-20. That's how they tie together, all right? And if you're really interested, this is what a sample of the current version of the PICS statements looks like. And as you can see, there's different requirement levels. You can see that over here on the side there are some questions being asked, like does the device support this, yes or no? So certain specs depend on other specs. And basically the idea here is that if you give this PICS document to somebody who's making a product or designing something, they can go through and answer all of these questions. They're all required, yes or no questions. And once you've done that, you know exactly which portions of the spec they've implemented. The required portions, the optional portions, the portions that only apply if they're a sender or a receiver, as you can see here with the pink things. And we think that that's going to help the industry, again, converge to everybody singing out of the same book and implementing the spec the same way. Okay? So that's what I had for, and so this is coming. You know, it's a little bit of preview, but it is quite an interesting process to watch it go forward. So I can take any questions. Again, my name is Wes Simpson. I'm the founder of LearnIPVideo.com, and we're having fun here at the showcase. So thanks.